Welcome to this next episode of the Brainforest Cafe. It's very much my pleasure to welcome Dr. Harry Shirley. He has a PhD in organic chemistry and research experience at the University of Oxford. His research focused on the synthesis of biologically active chemicals of marine origin. Having left academia some years ago, he now holds a deep passion for Jungian thought. He recently published his paper, The Buddhabrot of the Unus Mundus, in the International Journal of Jungian Studies, which explores the role of the Mandelbrot set in mind and matter. And as you can tell from the bio, Dr. Shirley is a polymath. He's interested in many subjects. Uh, we are not going to talk about his interest in biochemistry at all, although that may be a future podcast. We're going to talk about his exploration of the Mandelbrot set and the Buddhabrot set. Dr. Shirley, welcome to the Brainforest Cafe.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here with you today.
It's a real pleasure. Uh, I have to tell you, I have reviewed the material that you sent. I think the animation that you furnished is very useful, and maybe I found it useful because it kind of appeal. It's I mean it kind of appeals to my level of understanding. But what I am gleaning, I've read your paper and read the very long interview that you did on the other podcast. So I have a few questions, just to clarify where we're at here. Uh, Much of what you're talking about is how the world is made of numbers, and this is common. Goes back to Pythagoras, and if you look at the natural world clearly, you cannot separate numbers. It meant to me, one of the remarkable things about mathematics, maybe remarkable is not the word, but one of the things about mathematics that make it interesting is that mathematics can be applied to the natural world and can describe processes that intuitively you wouldn't necessarily think would yield to mathematical exploration. And yet, because there is a correspondence between the quantitative and the physical, and you're saying also the internal states, uh, mathematics then becomes the most powerful method we have for understanding these processes and also unifying them. Uh, Am I on the right track so far?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, one kind of big pivotal point in my development of understanding my own work um, was the realization really that numbers aren't something that we invented. We're all probably taught in school the kind of false story that um, numbers maybe are something we invented to understand reality logically, and therefore we use numbers in a way to understand things rationally and logically. But that's not really true. And the idea that science and maths are one and the same, or go hand in hand is actually not a valid belief. Yes, science uses mathematics. It's used it really well. It's helped us understand how to create life-saving drugs, how to send shuttles off to the moon. So it's been very successful,
Mhm.
but it's a misinterpretation to think that uh, um, um, maths is purely scientific, purely because maths is something that we discovered. And that's self-evident for me. Just as a real simple example, think of the number pi. We didn't invent pi as a way to understand circles or systems. We discovered it. Or we can look to nature and see how plants grow. And throughout nature we see fractal mathematics everywhere. And this is what Benoit Mandelbrot was trying to tell us in some of his books, how reality seems to be fractal. Um, so nature knew about mathematics long before we discovered it.
Hmm.
And I think a useful analogy is language. Um, Language is something that we invented, and it's very regional specific. So if aliens flew down from another planet, chances are they wouldn't speak our language. So that's evidence there that language is something invented. But with numbers, we probably wouldn't expect that. They would come down, and their system for numbers may be different. They would use a different symbol for the number two, or there may be other differences, but they probably still would have come across pi. They may call it something different,
Right.
but they would still use this constant to explain reality. And yeah, so the first hurdle we need to make is that one that numbers seem to be discovered, not invented.
Yeah, exactly. And I get that. That's so pi is a perfect example. We didn't discover it. It just is. I mean, the
Mm,
properties of pi has describes the properties of the circle, and it doesn't matter where in the universe that circle is. It's the same property. Would you say that other physical constants like the Planck constant or the cosmological constant, these are not really mathematical functions exactly, but perhaps the same kind of. I mean, the Planck constant is the Planck constant, whether you're an alien measuring it or a human on Earth. It's a quantitative uh, property built into the very nature of reality. I mean,
yeah,
that's
absolutely.
an
Look,
accurate
yeah,
thing to say.
yeah,
Aliens are gonna come up with the same value for the Planck constant that we will, or the cosmological constant. Well, a cosmological constant is probably a bad example because nobody can quite agree on what that is.
yeah.
But your so you talk about the Mandelbrot set, and you make the point, which I think is it's one of these points that one can make that once it's articulated, it's kind of course. How could it be otherwise? You know, this idea of the universe as a fractal system. I mean, fractals are everywhere, and in particularly in biological systems, but also it's not limited to that. You find it in geological systems, the structures of galaxies and this sort of thing. So the universe, this reality, physical reality, is based on these iterative processes like the Mandelbrot set. And you see them again and again in the way that the growth, the morphology of plants, the morphology of coastlines. Fractals are everywhere. In fact, I guess you could make the case that everything is fractal in a certain way. Is that? I mean,
Yeah, well, yeah, so you're saying fractals are everywhere. You've come to that conclusion by yourself. Now, from the Jungian perspective, a Jungian would say the next line to that would be, well, then fractals appear to be archetypal. They appear to emerge in reality around us. They seem to emerge in culture. Um, they seem to be embedded into the very fabric of um, matter, but also for me mind as well. So that's a leap. That's a leap that people haven't really made much before. And like you say, it does seem to be it's an obvious thing when you say it that everything else appears to be fractal. Everything around us, plants, the galaxies, everything. So why is it such why is it taking us so much time to realize that obviously our mind is likely to be fractal as well? We've emerged from nature just like a plant has. So it's likely that our inner world, our thoughts, our behaviors are also governed by fractal mathematics.
So let me ask you that. So you mentioned Jung's model of reality and the archetypes. Are you saying that fractals are archetypes?
More than that.
Pressure?
So fractal math, fract the Mandelbrot set appears to be related to the ordering of the psyche. So what you would actually go a step further and say fractal mathematics appears to be the ordering principle behind the archetypes. So we can see that in how that would be the case in matter. You can easily see a fern. You can see, okay, fractal mathematics is kind of the ordering principle. But what my work is on the Buddhabrot in particular, the Buddhabrot very simply seems to be the fractal ordering principle of the entire psyche. And therefore it's related to what Jung called the self. And the self is really just the entire psyche and its ordering principle. And the thing is with Jungian psychology, Jung died in 1961. And he was grappling with mathematics quite a lot with Wolfgang Pauli. But unfortunately, fractal mathematics wasn't really formalized really until the mid 70s, 80s. Um, but if fractal mathematics had been around, it fits perfectly into lots of the things that he discusses. In particular, as I say, the idea of the self, which is everything in the mind and its ordering principle. And Jung felt that the um, the ordering of the psyche was somehow related to numbers. He felt that the key to the mystery was numbers. But as I say, he didn't have fractal mathematics yet.
Right.
But now we have these really simple iterative formulas that make these amazing fractal patterns that appear to predict and model fractal behavior in the world around us. But my work is emphasizing, but also our inner world.
So is there something right? You see fractals everywhere in biology, everywhere in the world, and you're suggesting that fractals also understand underlie uh, experience. Effectively, the structure of a psyche is also. So let's talk about this Mandelbrot set a little bit. The Mandelbrot set, is there something primary or fundamental about it? I mean, there are many kinds of equations that will create fractals, right? Does the Mandelbrot set stand alone in some way from any other fractal equation
Yeah,
I might generate?
yeah, it's a really important question. Well, a few things stand out. Firstly, that it sounds silly, but firstly that it's humanoid, and it is a particularly striking fractal that contains lots of constants. So actually, within the Mandelbrot set, we do have pi, I think e, so the exponential e, and Fibonacci sequences.
Mhm.
Also something from a Jungian perspective that's intriguing about the Mandelbrot set is at the border, you've got an infinite galaxy of mandalas. And Jung felt that mandalas were actually a representation of the ordering of the psyche. So these mandalas are very intriguing. But yeah, before my work, which is related more precisely to the Buddhabrot, you're right in kind of questioning why is the Mandelbrot set special, and I kind of agree. I think the conventional Mandelbrot set before we get to the Buddhabrot doesn't necessarily stand out as excessively special. But it's the Buddhabrot for me, which is the game changer, and what really changes our view of what the Mandelbrot set is.
Right. So so here you've come right up against some of my confusion here that you can explain to me. So the Mandelbrot set can be generated by this iterative equation. You put the value in and then you get a result, then you put that in the next and so forth. But the solutions to those equations don't go to infinity. And you make the point that when they do, then it generates this Buddhabrot set. Explain to me how that works. I'm
Yeah.
quite unclear how the
So yeah, it's just about how we visualize the Mandelbrot set.
uh,
So the Mandelbrot set that we're really used to seeing has this black center and the black head, and it's only the borders that get interesting.
right,
Yeah, the normal Mandelbrot set really plots those bound um sequences. So sequence, as you say, sequences that don't go to infinity. But what Melinda Green did in the 90s, she was, I think, just playing around with the Mandelbrot set, and she just wondered these sequences actually that don't remain bound. These paths that fly off to infinity. Um, she decided to track their trajectories. So just making up numbers, imagine 5 goes to 25, 25 goes to 1,000 and something, goes to 2 trillion, and she's plotting these pathways, and then at some point she stops plotting because it's too much computational power. But essentially, the Buddhabrot is just a really, really simple visualization of the Mandelbrot set, which plots these trajectories to infinity. But that's all she does. There's no artistic stylization.
so it plots the trajectories of certain resolutions of the Mandelbrot set to infinity and filters out the ones that don't go to infinity that give you the
Yeah, it's
set.
ignoring those bound pathways. But you could create a visualization where you have all of the bound and all of the unbound as well. It's just down to how we visualize it. But it's really important to kind of just know that it is still all just it's just the Mandelbrot set. There's not anything kind of crazy going on. There's no stylization. It's just a way of visualizing the pathways.
Right, right. Yeah, so when you do this iteration with the values that go to infinity, then the Buddhabrot set emerges. And am I on the right track so far? If you
Yeah. Yeah, just like magic, out of nowhere, a meditating figure emerges that looks like a meditating Buddha, and it strikingly resembles immediately. It immediately evokes archetypal imagery of Buddha, or maybe Ganesh, or it might remind lots of people immediately of the chakra system. And one important thing I think really to highlight here is some people have thrown the word Pareidolia. I think that's how you say it, Pareidolia, at me. Oh, it's just Pareidolia. And if you go onto the Wikipedia page, you'll say, due to Pareidolia, it appears to look like a meditating Buddha. That's complete baloney. Pareidolia is where, so imagine I'm sat in a park and I look up at a cloud, and I see a cloud, and I say to a group of 100 people, I say, that looks like a giraffe. And I turn around and tell that to the other people. And let's say a very small number of them agree with me, but most of them say, Harry, what are you talking about? There is no giraffe.
right,
That's Pareidolia because it's subjective. It's subjective.
uh,
That is not the case with the Buddhabrot at all, because everybody sees a Buddha, because objectively, clearly, the Buddha imagery is there, as is kind of the chakra with the third eye, etc. So yes, it's quite striking that the Buddhabrot just emerged out of nowhere, and appeared to be a meditating Buddha. Yeah.
And so you in the material that you presented in your animation and lecture and so on, you show that how this fundamental pattern can be overlaid over all sorts of sacred geometry, sacred depictions, pictures of the Buddha and psychedelic art and many, many other things. So it seems to be something fundamental to what? To the way that the mind constructs reality? Is that what we're talking about here?
Well, so the Buddhabrot appears to be archetypal, meaning the fractal appears to emerge spontaneously across different cultures and time periods, in a similar way to mandalas have. So mandalas are very similar to the Buddhabrot. So a mandala is something archetypal. All cultures have mandalas, and Jung felt that they were, as I said earlier, representations of the ordering of the psyche. And if you before fractal mathematics, of course, but if you look at a mandala now, many of them you'll recognize as fractals, and they remind you of the Mandelbrot set. So yes, now the connection between mathematics and Jungian psychology is hasn't been well established, because this came later on in Jung's life. The idea that numbers play a psychic role. But as I said earlier, he felt that numbers were the primordial ordering principles of the psyche. But he just didn't know how. But what we've got here is a massive hint, because the Buddhabrot is kind of just like a mandala. It seems to spontaneously emerge in cultures, as I said earlier, across time and everything like that. So we have a hint there, perhaps, that the Buddhabrot is related to the ordering of the psyche. And what's most intriguing is that we already know within Jungian thought that the ordering of the psyche is related to the archetype of the self. The self, it manifests throughout time and cultures as Buddha, as Ganesh, maybe as Christ, perhaps as Egyptian pharaoh kings, perhaps could be self archetypes emerging.
Right.
So the Buddhabrot not only looks like the self, it looks like the self ought to look. It does look like a Buddha, but perhaps it represents perhaps it's the mathematical ordering principle of the psyche, because we've never come across an archetype like this before. Archetypes are supposed to emerge in culture, in art. But this is the first archetype to emerge from pure mathematics. And the exciting thing there is, well, for me, I like to think of the Buddhabrot as is potentially the first archetypal form emerging from the void. It Most archetypes are interconnected. They, the hero and the mother and the villain, it's all interconnected.
Right.
The Buddhabrot comes from nowhere.
This is
Um,
primal. It's primal, you're saying.
yeah,
Is
and that again,
yeah.
yeah, and
Not
that's what
only
we expect from the self. The self is, if you like, the first archetypal form. It's Shiva. It's the first thing to emerge from Brahman. So yeah, there's a million things that we can draw towards the Buddhabrot, but tell us it's potentially related to the ordering of the psyche. But what's exciting is it's not a mandala. This is precise and mathematical. So there's the potential. The Buddhabrot is the precise mathematical ordering principle for the entire psyche.
but does it apply only to that, or does it, I mean, does it bring, the classic uh division, the Cartesian duality between the world out here and the world in here? And those terms, you have to be
Yeah.
careful, those are loaded terms, but does the Buddhabrot set describe, basically what I'm hearing is that you think it describes something fundamental about the structure of the psyche, whatever we want to call that, consciousness or the mind or whatever, which is interesting because it implies that the mind has a structure, that there is a primal uh underlying organizing principle in the spirit, the mind, whatever we want to call it, uh, that is not dissimilar to the fractal patterns that you find in nature, which are describing physical reality ultimately, but in a numerical way. You have to help me here, Harry.
Yeah.
I'm
So,
either
well,
blathering or
yeah.
I'm
No, no, no.
inside.
So,
Which one?
um, is it is the Buddhabrot related to the concept of the Unus Mundus, where psyche and matter are one and the same?
Right, right.
But another word for Unus Mundus might be Brahman, or within Chinese philosophy, it might be Tao. Well, the Buddhabrot isn't the Unus Mundus because it has manifest. It's we can see it. And I think the Unus Mundus, the void, Brahman, is always out of touch. I don't think we can ever see it. But I do think that, as I said, I think the Buddhabrot is the first, seems to be the first archetypal form emerging from Brahman. So I think the Buddhabrot might be mostly tied to consciousness, tied to psyche. So I guess you're thinking, where is the matter? Well, for me, perhaps matter is the other half. Is the normal Mandelbrot set. So the normal Mandelbrot set we know contains constants already, like I said, pi, Fibonacci sequences, and the normal Mandelbrot set is bound. It's here. It's got predictable behavior, if you will. Perhaps the normal bound Mandelbrot set is related to matter, and then those paths flying away from the normal Mandelbrot set to infinity, so the Buddhabrot, perhaps they're related to psyche. So somehow the Mandelbrot set is holding psyche and matter together in the same mathematical framework. So yeah, we're getting very abstract here, but I don't think you can ever see, yeah, as I say, I don't think you can ever see the Unus Mundus itself, but I think what we could potentially be seeing in the Buddhabrot is the first thing that comes out of the void, which I think tells us something about the Unus Mundus. Perhaps that it for me, maybe the Unus Mundus is number, but it's number with no order. It's pure consciousness, it's pure number, but there's no equation yet. There's no iteration. It just is, we could perhaps call it random. And that's perhaps what the Unus Mundus would look like. But yeah, we're I think pushing the limits of human cognition here, trying to understand, yeah, the Unus Mundus.
So does this mean that I mean, if the Buddhabrot set, this is like the most primal description of the psyche, of the structure of the psyche, and this unified psyche, this unus mundus, would it, the implication is that just like aliens who were mathematically inclined, they could discover the Mandelbrot set, with the right set of equations. Would they discover the Buddhabrot set, and would it look like it looks like to us? I mean, one of the things that's remarkable about the Buddhabrot is it looks like Buddha. I mean, it's got all of those characters that we find again and again in sacred iconography and geometry. So,
Yeah, you're touching on something really, really deep there because we can see that the Buddhabrot is humanoid. We can see that the Buddhabrot has a head and it has kind of eyes and it has a heart and a maybe a chest region. And so, I mean, one conclusion to draw from the Buddhabrot is that the humanoid shape is the humanoid shape that we see in our bodies is as a result of the Mandelbrot set dictating both matter and mind. So an alien race, yeah, we're an alien race perhaps would also have to be humanoid. If the Buddhabrot is the first archetypal form emerging from the fabric of the universe, and we are sharing the same universe with them, then we perhaps would conclude that consciousness is itself this humanoid shape, and they would perhaps come to the same conclusions as us. But yeah, I hadn't thought of that yet. But yeah, it's an interesting thought.
I mean, yeah, it is an interesting thought, and I mean, it's very it's very difficult to test that, but, uh, if it's true, if the Buddhabrot set is this kind of fundamental, manifestation of psyche, then effectively anywhere in the universe that you encounter intelligence, or at least intelligence like ours, might look like us, if through the interaction of inner and outer forces, what we have come to look like and what
Mm,
come to how we've come to, how our brains operate, how our spirit
mm.
operates, it would imply that there really aren't aliens in a certain, or if we were to encounter aliens, they would seem eerily
Oh,
familiar to us.
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, but you could take it back to plants as well to make the idea easier to grasp. So plants growing on another Earth-like planet, do we expect them to follow fractal forms or do we expect them to not? Now, I think we expect them to follow fractal mathematics because that's related to efficiency, to Darwinism, to survival. Um, so perhaps the same then is true for more advanced life forms that they develop. Perhaps the very reason we are humanoid is because of the Buddhabrot. And what I've said in a couple of other, it might have been an interview or a comment. Someone said, "Why is the Buddhabrot humanoid?" And I said, "No, no, no, you've got it all wrong. We are Buddhabrot-oid." So yes, that's the way to think about it. Yeah,
We are Buddhabrot what?
oid. So the
We're
Buddhabrot isn't.
Buddhabrot-oid, yes.
Yeah, the
Right,
Buddhabrot isn't humanoid. We
makes
are
sense,
Buddhabrot-oid.
makes
Yeah,
sense, right. Yeah, exactly, we are Buddhabrot-oid, and any intelligence in some iteration is gonna be also Buddhabrot, o because
maybe.
this transcends time and space. This is fundamental, this is a fundamental property of reality
Yeah,
itself, just like pi is built.
just like pi. Yeah, just like we expect other life forms to come across pi and use pi, we expect nature to use the Mandelbrot set and to use the Buddhabrot to for consciousness to evolve and grow as it interrelates to matter. We expect the Buddhabrot and the Mandelbrot set to be involved in those pathways, and that may again be related to efficiency. That may again be related to stability, etc.
So does that imply that, if this Buddhabrot set kind of sets the framework for the unity of mind and matter in a certain way, or that's kind of the foundation for these two things to come together. So does that imply that I'm not sure what I'm trying to say here, that effectively it is as built into the structure of reality as the nature of pi. So you're going to find it everywhere.
Absolutely everywhere.
If you look,
And well, I'm hoping after my work becomes more and more well known, we will begin to realize that the Buddhabrot has been hidden. They're lying without realizing it in many cultural outputs that humans have made, um, um, unintentionally emerging like mandalas. Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
I am, yeah, I mean, it's very, yeah, on one hand, I'm sort of like, this is like a fundamental insight into the nature of reality, and the qualities that unify mind and matter and all that. I mean, it's a fundamental insight. And then on the other hand, you could back up and say, well, of course, how could it be otherwise? It
Yeah.
well, I mean, you look closely at it, and then you say, it had to be this way. It couldn't be the other way."
And that's obviously during the journey, I've been working on this for a number of years now, and I've gone through different stages of confidence and yeah, with such a profound insight, I couldn't just believe it straight away. But obviously, I've grown to have to believe in my own work. And I have confidence, yeah, but I can't see it any other way now. Now that I've accepted that the Buddha appears to be, yeah, the ordering of the psyche. Um, yeah, I can't. Yeah, it seems to make perfect sense. And for me, being passionate about Jungian psychology, now every time I read Jung, I'm relating it to my work and how almost everything he said really fits into my framework really well. And lots of the things he didn't quite get can be explained using my framework. So I can't see it being any other way now.
So, what do we do with this insight? I mean, how does it help us understand, or what does it help us understand, or is it just,
Mm.
uh I mean, it helps us to understand a lot of things. Do we apply this in some practical way? Does it
It's it's a very important finding for humanity. Um, one thing one thing to know is that the chakra system itself, for Jung, was a projection of individuation onto the human spine. And we see also that kind of the ascent of human consciousness in many other spiritual systems, Kabbalah, Kundalini. There's often the idea of an ascent towards unity with God, maybe,
Hmm.
or in yoga, it may be reaching nirvana. There's often this stage of unity. And for me, the Buddha also appears to have this imagery of an ascent, which for me echoes the chakra system with precision. Um, what we've got in the Buddhabrot is, yes, now we have a mathematical framework for individuation, so psychological growth, or some people might call it the expansion of consciousness, or some people might call it the movement to supra consciousness, whatever wording you want to use. But we have a mathematically precise chakra system, if you will. So we can now map out um, individual psychological growth up the Buddhabrot spine. But what's striking to me is that individuation is never just an individual. We always have a collective as well. And Eric Newman wrote about this a lot, about collective individuation. That humanity's consciousness, if you like, evolves over time. And we're in a current state at the minute. We've been in previous stages in the past. the Egyptian mind was very different to our own. But what the Buddhabrot now tells us with mathematical precision is where we are heading. Um, so
And if I may interject, just for my own clarity, not only does it bring mathematical precision to it, but I think it also implies that this iconography that you see in alchemy, for example, or some of these other representations, it's not that they understood the Buddhabrot set and were applying this. They did not have this mathematical understanding of it. They had an intuition about these organizing principles, organizing structures, which at the end turn out to have a mathematical basis. I don't think they worked on with that perception, or did they? Did they really understand this was fundamentally this was about a mathematical construct?
they wouldn't have used the word mathematics, but they intuited. I think they would have. I think what we can say is they intuited an ordering of consciousness in a hierarchical structure. But with the chakra system, the level of similarity to the Buddhabrot is mind blowing, and what it really teaches me is the power of the unconscious, and also how the unconscious clearly is governed by a number, because it seems to work with number really well. Um,
Yeah.
and whilst you've raised that point, it's interesting to think about how mathematics relates to intuition. And your brother actually talks about this in a number of talks, how, and I touched upon it earlier, how we've kind of thought that mathematics is just related to logic, but no, it's an intuitive exercise. And that's what we see in mathematicians. So one of the world's most famous mathematicians, an Indian mathematician called Ramanujan, he was well known for coming up with lots of his intuitive leaps in his theories through his dreams, through his own visions. So maths has always been related to intuition in a way. So
Mhm.
I dare to think how, the ancient yogis, the ancient mystics who are the masters of meditation, I wonder, I just wonder how deep they could go into this layer of the psyche that seems to be governed by number. It's something really interesting to think about.
Absolutely. So that brings up something I was thinking about. What is the most ancient manifestation of this Buddhabrot-like pattern that you're aware of?
Um,
Talking
I think maybe the
Paleolithic,
oldest is
Pleistocene, or where does
um
it show up?
King Tutankhamun's necklace is a quite a nice example of it appearing to be echoed in that piece of jewelry. But also the coffinet statue of Tutankhamun seems to echo the ratios and symmetries of the Buddhabrot quite strikingly. So I think that's 2500 BC, unless I'm completely wrong. But yeah, I think that's one of the oldest examples. Um, so we go from all the way from around 2 to 3000 BC, all the way up to modern psychedelic art. So the Buddhabrot is, for me, always there. Yeah.
So, is there any instance that you know of where the Buddhabrot pattern shows up in like cave paintings and that sort of thing, like Paleolithic? Does it
Yeah.
that far?
Obviously, yeah, there's obviously a danger to lots of my work that I can start to see at lots of places where actually that one's a bit of a stretch. But yeah, I can see some Aboriginal art that, you know, I could try and see it there, but I haven't ever included those examples because I know that the criticism will be quite strong that, yeah, because it's a humanoid shape. There are some examples where I'm thinking, yeah, that could be it. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want to be stigmatized as a complete nutcase. It's just
Not a complete one.
I understand. I understand. When you start speculating about the ancient mind, you're into some pretty pretty dangerous territory, you know.
Yeah.
But then you're also in a place where you're free to speculate because no one really knows. And that kind of brings us, I have to talk about psychedelics in this regard because uh clearly they're part of the picture of trying to develop this understanding of the Buddhabrot set. And uh, the Buddhabrot set probably represents something fundamental about the structure of consciousness. So one would think that some of the well, and you talk about psychedelic art, and you cite several instances of psychedelic art where you can dissect out different elements of the Buddhabrot set. So there are definitely similarities. I think an important distinction, though, I mean, psychedelic art is not psychedelic experience. You know, experience, psychedelic art is something that people who have psychedelic experiences, then they try to remember what they saw.
Yeah.
My question is, and you may have to get experimental about this, Harry. You may not have the answers, but if you took a psychedelic or if one takes a psychedelic in the right circumstances, you know, does this pattern emerge? In other words, is it part of the
Mm.
processing gestalt of a brain that is activated by psychedelics?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a really interesting question because yeah, my work's explored the Buddhabrot as an external image a lot, hasn't it? And yeah, the next chapter I think for my work is exploring whether the Buddhabrot is an inner image. Um, but I have since kind of communicating my work more and more, I have had some anecdotal reports of people saying, a couple of people saying they actually dreamt the Buddha brought. And then a couple of reports saying that, yeah, they had kind of experienced Buddhabrot type entities during a trip. But yeah, I don't know this at all. If if I can get like more support for my work, maybe one day I would get scientific about it and I would talk to people during a trip or after a trip and ask them what kind of fractal forms they were seeing. Now, I wouldn't show them the Buddha Brot before, obviously, because they're more likely to see it.
Right.
Um, I don't know. I have to say, I've never taken a psychedelic, but I've spoken to people who have, and I think the Mandelbrot set has been associated with psychedelics in the past, right?
Sure.
Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah.
Fractal things. Well, I don't know, Harry. You may have to cross the line and test for yourself whether it shows up, and it's okay. You know, it would be, uh, but also it's so tricky to approach this because anybody who's heard this conversation or is aware of your work
No,
is like immediately contaminated. You know, in other words, they would not be able to have the pure experience of the Buddhabrot because, you know, they know of your work and naturally that's going to come up, you know, people and so it may be tricky, but there may be, actually, you know, there's a lot of, um, the UK, you're based in the UK, right?
yeah,
Well, there's a lot of psychedelic research going on at different parts of the UK, and there are some people pushing some very interesting boundaries there. You might be able to uh, have a structured experience with them that would be basically focused on seeing, you know, I mean, the naive question, you know, you take a psychedelic, do you see this
yeah.
Buddhabrot set or something like it? And is that a reflection of brain structures, neural activity?
Mm.
the way the mind is processing
Yeah.
information, probably all of the above, right?
Yeah, well, something I hope that happens is that materialist scientists, so neuroscientists, I hope they come across my work and at least think it over for a short while, because there there could be um it could relate to neuroscience somehow. It could be somehow that the mind can create these fractal forms that are
Mhm.
organizing principles that are somehow related to how consciousness emerges, or how consciousness is related to quantum systems. I don't, I haven't gone down that rabbit hole much myself, but I think there's stuff to be explored there, definitely.
Yeah, I think it is too. I mean, it could just be a very important, there's an interesting author named Simon Powell, and he's written about psychedelics, particularly psilocybin. And he makes the point that psychedelics can be used as a lens. Basically, they can be viewed as a scientific instrument, a
Mm.
lens through which you can view reality. And he's referring to external reality, from a perspective. That shift in framework gives one the ability to notice processes in nature that normally we're programmed to filter out, and
Oh
what
yeah,
psychedelics can do temporarily is they disable these filters. So they open up
yeah.
the sensorium to a wider range.
I have I have no doubt that there would be value there, because I already have complete faith in how dreams can be so useful to scientists. There's millions of examples out there. So my background's chemistry. You know, the structure for benzene. Kekule dreamt that he couldn't work out how benzene is structured. It came to him in a dream.
Right.
Um, and for me, a dream is very similar to a psychedelic. That might sound like a crazy thing to say, but they're both about the dissolution of the ego. Ego softens, hides away, goes somewhere, and from that, the unconscious contents, the contents that we're not allowed to see, emerge. In a dream, it's much more subtle than a psychedelic, but it's
Right.
for me. For me, it's a similar principle, and through breaking down those ego boundaries, you can glimpse into reality as it is. So yeah, that sounds really interesting, and I'm sure there is value in that.
Yeah, I think it's worth looking into. Wow. Well, I don't your insights are so profound, and it's uh you have to pay attention to fully grok what you're talking about, but I think that you're onto something here, definitely. You're aware, you say, of my brother's work a bit, and you're probably aware of the time wave that he constructed, the so-called Timewave zero, this
Yeah,
mathematical construction based
yeah,
on I Ching,
yeah.
supposedly a map of time, very naively conceived, and in my opinion, I mean, even though I'm his brother, I was always skeptical about the time wave. But in this context, I think I don't believe it describes the structure of time. I don't think you could prove that it does, or more importantly, the problem that one of the main conceptual problems with the time wave was you could not disprove it. You couldn't specify what would disprove it. I think it's been thoroughly disproven. But that said, I think it's a very interesting mathematical or quasi-mathematical structure that came from my brother's very fertile mind. He was by no means a mathematician or a statistician, which would have been a skill that would have been useful to construct the time wave. And yet he came up with this idea about cycles, and and that that grew out of his psychedelic experiences. And then he tried to put
Yeah.
structure around that, related to the structure of the I Ching and so forth. Uh,
Right. Now,
I Ching relate
yeah.
to any of this? As,
Yeah, absolutely. The I Ching is based on number, um, and pattern. It's
right,
based on archetypal patterns within the psyche, and the fact that it relates to number and synchronicity. Well, it's divination, which is related to synchronicity.
right,
Yeah, definitely connected. And my feeling is that time is also related to my work, but I just haven't had the psychic energy to even go there yet because the things that I've been uncovering have been a lot, it's taken a lot to work it out. Then time must be somehow related here. Because as I said, the ascent up the Buddhabrot appears to be related to psychological growth. Um, and somehow that is related to time, because the only way that we grow psychologically, the only way that consciousness does grow is through moving through time and matter. So there's a connection there. Um, so we do have a connection to time that we've never had before, but I don't know what to make of it. But yeah, there could be something really profound there, definitely. But yeah, the I Ching definitely relates to Jung, to archetype, to number, to synchronicity, which is all of the stuff that my work's been exploring.
right, right. And of course, Jung was fascinated by the I Ching,
Yeah.
and various people from Leibniz too. I think Leibniz was one of the first, but for example, in the 20th century, the relationships of the I Ching to the structure of DNA have been described. You know, they're both the same. Basically, I forget what the exponential is, but they're based on iterations of powers of two, and it's a 64 uh, element system, and it's so again, maybe it's another effort to kind of fundamentally discern the patterns in nature that, you know, intuitively and by inclination, we try to relate to quantified systems. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. That I Ching is a sense, a way to quantify and put a mathematical basis behind what is effectively a process of intuition. You know, how do you,
Yeah.
as a divination instrument, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a way to harness synchronicity as well. Synchronicity, we often think of something that happens to us. But I Ching appears to be a way to tap into the numerical ordering of reality, and therefore kind of detect these tides of reality to kind of work out what fractal tide we are in, and therefore what the future could potentially hold. So it's, again, is all these archetypal patterns of meaning that are related to number. So it's all interconnected. It's all very complex. But yeah, there's something there.
Well, I tell you, you've stretched my mind a lot here. It might take weeks to recover from this, but it's very interesting what you're exploring for sure.
Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me. It's been a real honor to speak to you. Maybe after you've digested, we can have a round two in at some point again this year.
I would love to do that. That would be, yeah, after we have had a chance, that would be great. I'd love to have you back, and certainly if you have any further insights,
Mm.
feel free to let us know. And yeah, I mean, I'm just very much admire what you're doing, if not totally understand it, but it's all going somewhere. So thank you very much for coming on, and we'll revisit this a few months down the line.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.